Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming. We are delighted that you were able to join us. We want to welcome you to the Potluck Insurgency's Zoom presentation. What just happened? A discussion of the Iowa legislative session for 2021, which I believe is not over yet. We have distinguished speakers with us tonight, Senator Zach Walz and State Representative Jennifer Confirst. We'll begin the discussion by talking about the 2021 legislative session and then talk about what we can do as advocates. And it is my pleasure to introduce Zach, who I just have so much admiration for and consider a friend. We're really delighted to have him with us. Thank you very much for coming, Zach.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for having me join you all tonight. It's great to see everybody. This is such a terrific group, and I really look forward to being able to provide a legislative update in person. I know that we're like so close to the light at the end of the tunnel, and I know that certainly I share the excitement that I saw. I saw many of you at the recent special nominating convention for the Board of Supervisors. It was great to see so many Democrats. Jennifer and I will tell you, it is really tough at the State House. We're surrounded by so many Republicans. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about what is going on with the Republican trifecta. But we are all incredibly excited and looking forward to the day when Democrats are able to break the trifecta and get back into the majority like we have here tonight. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the good, the bad, and the ugly from the 2021 legislative session. Which, as was just mentioned, is still ongoing. I'll also touch just briefly on what some of the kind of key issues are that are outstanding. We're expecting, hopefully, to wrap up here in the next week and a half. And our expectation is that there are a handful of issues that are left to be resolved, and we'll touch on just a few of those. And then Jennifer and I will each talk about what we think you can do to help us as we prepare for 2022. So with that, a couple of the good things that have, and I know there are only a handful of these, but there are a couple of good things that have happened here in the 2021 legislative session. And one of those was the passing of a bill that's going to create a new state framework for investing in broadband deployment across our state. That's something that was worked on a bipartisan basis. I worked on the bill in the Senate alongside Democrats and Republicans, and that bill passed unanimously through both chambers and was signed into law by the governor a few weeks ago. Now, Republicans have also said that they're not actually going to fund that program to the level that the governor had asked for, but thankfully, President Biden and Vice President Harris have made clear that Infrastructure Week is finally here, and they're going to use some of those dollars to plug and play on the broadband investment. So thanks to the Biden bucks, we are going to be able to make a historic investment into broadband expansion throughout the state. And I think it's really important for folks to know that that's being paid for through funds that were passed in the American Rescue Plan that every single Republican who represents the state of Iowa voted against when that bill was in front of the U.S. Congress. There are two other things that haven't happened yet, but that are likely to come together here in the closing days. The first one of those is funding for expansion of childcare services and some policy changes that should make it easier for Iowans to access childcare benefits in the state. This is part of some of the ongoing negotiations that I referenced earlier, but our hope is that they will be included in the final package, and it does look like there's agreement between the Senate and House Republicans on what that is going to look like. The same can be said, thankfully, for affordable housing. We'll talk in just a second about one of the bad changes that happened on affordable housing. But there is, I think, emerging agreement on the expansion of investment in the workforce housing tax credit, which is one of the primary state tools that we use to fund development of affordable housing. And there's also support for lifting the current cap on the funds that can go to our state housing trust funds. So like here in Johnson County, we have the Johnson County Housing Trust Fund, and most of the dollars that it receives are from the state, but those dollars are currently capped at $3 million. And it looks like we'll be seeing that investment grow from 3 to 6 million, if not more. So we're really, really excited about that being included in the final agreement. On the bad, I want to talk about the bills that were bad that were actually passed into law. And in the ugly, I'm going to talk about the bills that were the Republican bills that were proposed, but that thankfully were not blocked. And so that's going to be the distinction I use here. On the bad, it's been in the news a lot in the last few days, but the Republican attack on voter rights, their voting suppression bill that was written in no small part by the Heritage Foundation. If you all saw, this just kind of broke late on Friday, kind of over the weekend. The Mother Jones investigatory team got their hands on some footage of the executive director of Heritage Action, which is the C4 advocacy group from the Heritage Foundation, saying to their donors behind closed doors, we basically wrote 3 of the worst sections of that law, which is just kind of the smoking gun of this kind of out of Iowa right-wing extremist influence on changes to Iowa election law. And that was put into place by, in the Senate, Senator Robbie Smith, and over in the House, person who actually represents part of Johnson County, Bobby Kaufman. So definitely a really, really concerning development that we found out just last week. Of course, Republicans in Iowa are denying that Heritage had any influence, but if that's true, that means that Heritage broke several laws in terms of their illegal lobbying efforts. And so we're determined to get to the bottom of this. And obviously, we need a full investigation into what happened. In addition, we saw very recently a radical expansion of charter schools that I think are really kind of setting the stage for the passage of educational vouchers, which Republicans took a run at in the Senate. Thankfully, over in the House, Jennifer and her team were able to stop that from advancing. But we know that they're kind of setting the stage for that, continuing to pull the plug out and pulling the rug out from underneath public education here in our state. Another thing that happened that I was really really unnerved by was the Republican attack on the First Amendment. You've all probably read about the Republicans trying to ban divisive concepts. And while they're talking about banning divisive concepts, they're warning about these assaults on the First Amendment. It's just the most Orwellian thing that you can imagine, where they're saying that there's this attack on the First Amendment happening when they're the ones who are trying to ban divisive concepts. I mean, George Orwell literally couldn't have written it any better himself. And so it's been really frustrating to watch. There's been zero nuance to the Republican conversation around these issues. We're a state and we're a country that understand that there are enormous challenges in our past and inequities that exist today. And if you want to say that we can't talk about those concepts in government, we can't talk about those concepts in our schools or our institutions of higher learning, that's the very definition of government censorship. And so there's obviously a grave concern that anybody who loves freedom or has a passion for equity issues should have about the Republican assaults on the First Amendment this year. They also, I mentioned affordable housing earlier. One of the big priorities for Republicans this session was, and this is a double negative, so bear with me, a ban on local ordinances that prevent landlords from discriminating against renters who use Section 8 housing vouchers. So essentially the green light to discriminate against people who use Section 8 vouchers, right? That's what Republicans did this year. And so even though the governor's out here talking about affordable housing, and even though it does look like there will be some good things that happen around affordable housing before we gavel out here, hopefully in the next week or two, they also took an enormous step backwards, and they prevented cities like Iowa City, which had one of those ordinances in place, from being able to protect people who depend on Section 8 housing vouchers for their housing and their shelter. And so that was obviously a huge step in the wrong direction. I don't know, Jennifer, if maybe you want to talk about the 2 constitutional amendments that they passed in terms of the housing or guns and abortion. So I won't get to those. I'll let you talk about those. But in terms of the ugly, in terms of like the awful stuff that Republicans proposed that hasn't passed, this is where you kind of got to like, I don't know, prevent your jaw from falling to the floor, I guess. But so the very first bill, I mean, so here we are, middle of a global pandemic when we gavelled back in January. Democrats at that point had announced that we had a 22-point set of plans to deal with COVID-19. Republicans' very first subcommittee, the very first public hearing that they held on any proposed legislation, nothing to do with the global pandemic that as of this week has killed 6,000 Iowans. Instead, the very first bill that Senate Republicans held a subcommittee on was a bill to reinstate the death penalty. And like, that's not a joke, but I mean, we're in the middle of this disease that has killed literally thousands of Iowans. And Senate Republicans' top priority, the number one thing they hold a subcommittee on, was to bring back the death penalty. It was shameful, it was wrong, it was completely out of step, completely out of touch with what people in our state were asking for, what they needed. But the good news is that thanks to thousands of people across our state speaking up and saying, Iowa Republicans, what the hell are you doing? They shelved that bill and it has not moved forward, which is a big thing that we have to be thankful for. This group probably also knows that Republicans made their most serious run yet ever at banning tenure from our public universities. This was, I mean, legitimately shocking. I actually was on the subcommittee 2 years ago when Senator Zahn from Des Moines first introduced the elimination of tenure. And thankfully, that bill did not get out of committee last year. This year, that bill did get out of committee and actually came to the Senate floor. So thankfully, that bill did not advance through the House and it's been dealt with. But that was the most radical attack on higher education that we've seen. Well, it was actually maybe one of only two. I mean, there were two radical attacks on higher education this year because there was that and the divisive concepts. But I mean, kind of a rough year, right, in terms of our region's universities. And then Republicans ask, like, why young people are leaving Iowa. And, you know, I guess I'm not allowed to just bring them a mirror and like show them, right? But clearly that's what the real issue is here. And there's two more things here before we kind of wrap up the legislative developments. One of them was Republicans in the Senate passed a very comprehensive and frankly very radical bill attacking social media companies that quote unquote banned conservative speech. Now, let me just break that down real quick. First of all, there's not a single person in the United States of America who has been banned for having conservative speech. Not a single person has been banned from Facebook or Twitter because they have been advocating for lower corporate taxes or, you know, to get rid of background checks or, you know, to completely outlaw all abortions ever. Not one person has ever been banished from any social media platform for advocating something like that. And to prove that point, we, Senate Democrats, offered an amendment that said very clearly, people cannot be banned from these platforms for advocating for insurrection, for engaging in treasonous behavior, and for engaging in hateful speech. Republicans, of course, defeated that amendment on a party line measure because that is what this bill was actually about. It was never about conservative censorship. It was always about trying to protect conservatives who violated the terms of service for these platforms and engaged in things like seditious behavior, inciting insurrection, or engaging in hate speech against other people who have protected status in this country. Now, there's a conversation to be had about monopolies and, you know, are these companies too powerful for democracy, all of that. And we should have that conversation. But that is not the conversation that Republicans in the Iowa legislature were trying to have. And then finally, and I want to talk about it just briefly because the governor did something related to this in the last few days. Republicans in the Iowa Senate made a very serious run at gutting Iowa's unemployment benefit system. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those things that's still in the mix. It moved in the Senate, didn't move in the House, and our hope is that it will not become a part of any final agreement between the House and the Senate before we gavel out. But of course, I'm sure you all saw just here in the last week, the governor essentially cutting off her nose to spite her face, saying that Iowa is no longer going to participate in the federal unemployment benefits program that's giving an extra $300 a week to people who are facing unemployment still. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric in this space. Republicans are essentially saying that Iowa workers are lazy and mooching off the government. We know better because we all know Iowans. We know that Iowans work really hard and take employment when those opportunities are there. But aside from all the rhetoric, the facts on this are really clear. Last year, the Chicago Federal Reserve, not exactly a hotbed of liberal radicalism, issued a study that found that people receiving unemployment benefits received or they engage in much more intense searches for employment while they're receiving those benefits. those searches become much less intense once those benefits run out. And then finally, if they are receiving those benefits, they are just much more likely to match with a better paying job than if they're not receiving those benefits. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like. When you have that economic security, you're able to spend more of your time and energy really focused on finding a better job. And when that employment security or when the unemployment security isn't there, it's a lot harder to focus on the task at hand. I mean, that's not exactly rocket science. So those are a couple of the things that have been going on at the Iowa legislature and the governor's mansion. In terms of 2022, I'll say just briefly, the last thing that I want to talk about, even though it's not really a bill, is the redistricting process. I know that this group of folks knows all about redistricting, and you probably have heard about the delays that are happening because of the federal census being so messed up by the Trump administration. The good news is that we'll get that data likely in September. The kind of curveball is that the Iowa state constitution actually says that if the lines for the new maps haven't been drawn by September 1st, the Supreme Court takes authority for that process. Now, the good news for us is if the Supreme Court's in charge, they're not going to let gerrymandering happen in Iowa. There's been a lot of concern, I think very rightly so, that Republicans would take advantage of their trifecta to change how Iowa draws our lines. The good news is that by getting out to that September deadline, that's not going to happen. And so net, we think that's a positive development, and we think that we're going to get fair maps. The challenge is, and this is where I'll tap kind of all of you, the biggest thing that you can do to help us for 2022, we're going to get the maps exceptionally late in the process this year. We may not get them until November or December. And as a result, our recruiting for the state house, for the state senate, is going to be way, way, way behind normal. Now, we're reaching out to people. We're trying to find people in different communities that are spread out geographically. But because we don't know what the lines are, it's just a lot harder to convince somebody to run for office. And so if you know somebody who's in a community that is looking like it will probably have a battleground seat in 2022, reach out and just send me an email. I'd love to hear their name, a little bit about their background. I've got kind of like a public intake form, so to speak, where you can like fill in some information, somebody you think should run for office. And Roseanne, I'll send you an email afterwards and we'll start sending that around. But if you know somebody who you think would be a great candidate for office, or you yourself think that you'd be a great candidate, we'd love to hear from you because we know that it's going to be an unusual challenge this year. And so we're looking for people all over Iowa, all across the state, who are interested in running for office and who are going to be able to make that decision with a little bit less of a runway this year than they would normally. So I think I've already blown past my time. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer Kahn first. I've really only gotten to know Jennifer better in the last 6-7 months or so. We were both elected in 2018. We came in together, and we both were kind of elevated into higher leadership roles this year. I lead the Senate Democrats. Jennifer is the #2 House Democrat over in the House, where she serves as the minority whip. Jennifer has been driving all kinds of awesome change in her caucus. Jennifer, I have to confess, I don't know your district number, but you're over there on like the western part of Polk County. Yep. And she's someone who I've gotten to know really well. She's smart, she's tough. She's a lot of fun to hang out with and helps keep us all sane in the hellhole that is the State House under Republican trifecta control. So with that, I'll turn it over to my friend, Jennifer Kahn first.
Thank you very much, Zach. And it's great to work with you. And I know this group doesn't know me as well as you know, Zach. So yeah, my district is just west of Des Moines. So I live about 2 blocks from the Des Moines city limits. And my kids went through Des Moines public schools. That's why we chose this house back in the day, back in 2008. Not a great time to buy a house, you might remember. Actually, a great time to buy one, not a great time to sell one. But so we've been here since then. And we're thrilled to be here. I represent Windsor Heights, Clive, and West Des Moines. So parts of those 2 other suburbs. And I'm in a district that flipped in 2018. So in 2016, I ran for the House and lost. I ran against the House Majority Leader and lost. And then I ran against him again in 2018 for a year until right before the filing deadline. He moved to redder pastures, as it were, and moved to a different district. And so then I ran against someone else for the rest of 2018 and was honored to be elected then. So I'm here to sort of supplement what Zach has said and talk about the House side. Things are, well, first I should also thank you for sending us Representative Bohannon. She's amazing. We love her. I'm thrilled to work with Christina. And all of the Johnson County delegation is great friends and great leaders in our caucus and in the House. A couple things I wanted to clear or let you know about is that we as Democrats, we don't get to have a say, right? We introduce bills, they don't get subcommittees, they don't get committee hearings, they don't get brought up on the floor. I introduced a couple bills this year that were graciously taken by my Republican colleagues, refiled with their name on them, and then passed, which is fine, right? Because at least the policy happened. But we did introduce, I think between the Senate and the House, about 50 bills that would have been specifically pointed at addressing COVID in the state of Iowa, the COVID recovery. And that included everything from getting kids back to school safely to supporting Iowa families, to small business grants and expanding that program, to protecting Iowans with telehealth parity, to accountability and transparency for businesses that are not behaving in an ethical manner during this pandemic and putting their workers at risk. So we introduced a lot of legislation about that because we're not just about complaining and reacting to what Republicans are doing at the Capitol. We're trying to represent our constituents and Iowans with positive, proactive change that we're trying to propose. So a little frustrating, not surprising that none of this gets picked up, but we're grateful for the pieces that we see that end up in Republican bills. There were a few things that, and I'll talk about those two constitutional amendments too. I think it's important to understand some things that were good common sense bills that were killed by the Republican trifecta as well. So, we had, felon voting rights to be constitutionally restored. We talked about that. We talked about we voted for in the House, prohibiting the gay panic defense, so it's called. We passed a bill in the House that capped the cost of insulin to $100 a month. We have a bill that's great that has Republican support that the governor even wanted, that would allow pharmacists to give birth control to women over the counter, which could be a huge boon for women's health in the state. Hasn't come up. We've got, so I'm trying to see here, sorry, enhances communication with our returning veterans to make sure they get the access, the benefits they've earned. So we had some good bills that passed in a bipartisan manner, either in the House or the Senate, and then just haven't been taken up by the other side. So it does seem to me right now, my dad was a reporter up at the Capitol for a long time, covered the legislature for about 35 years. And when I got elected, he told me, don't forget this. Republicans are your opponents. The Senate is your enemy. And I do think that while I really do appreciate the Democratic caucus in the Senate, it does appear that the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans feel that way about each other right about now, as they're trying to come up with some sort of a deal. So those are some things that we had passed in a bipartisan way that just haven't made it through, which is frustrating. I will say there are some great things that are some terrible bills that have died. But we're not willing to say anything is dead until we sine die, because they can add anything to an amendment at the end. So we get a lot of relief, people sending us notes after the funnels that say, oh my gosh, thank goodness this is dead, but we're just not ready to say they're dead yet, right? So we hope they are, but we're not. Things like, digital tracking for women who are looking for reproductive care online, a ban on trans athletes playing sports in high school, a bill that would discourage Iowans from getting life-saving vaccines, punishing cities for keeping the budget balanced, and a lot of other things that are so far dead, which is great. So we're just keeping an eye on those, because here in the final stages, when everybody's negotiating, we're hearing lots of things that could come up. There's been a lot of talk about medical malpractice reform and tort reform issues that would place caps on medical malpractice and trucker liability. We're opposed to those efforts, and so far they've not come up in the House or the Senate, I believe. And so we're just keeping an eye on making sure those don't come up. And then right at the beginning of session, while the Senate was debating the pressing issue of reinstating the death penalty, the House was just fixing the Constitution left and right. They right away, one of the first things they did was pass for the second time a constitutional amendment to uphold all gun laws in the state to the higher standard of strict scrutiny, which Christina Bohannon will explain beautifully to you anytime you want. But essentially it means that it could very much put things like background checks, common sense gun regulations that we have in the state of Iowa at risk, because it places them up to a higher standard and makes it harder for those laws to be upheld. So that we're going to need your help on this. This is, we as Democrats proposed introducing the Second Amendment to the US Constitution directly into Iowa's Constitution as a way to say we support the Second Amendment, but let's do it just like at the federal level. That was turned down because they want this higher standard. It's going to be on the ballot in 2022. right with me, right with Zach, right with Christina, and right with all the other candidates we're trying to get into the House and Senate as Democrats. So this bill will be before the voters in the fall of 2022. So, or this amendment. So we need to have a strong fight back to let people know what this amendment will really do and what common sense measures it puts at risk. And then the other amendment that we passed in the House, we gave it to the Senate. The Senate changed it, and we haven't seen it yet, but we're hearing that that might be part of the final deal. Was an amendment to the Iowa Constitution that places that says that the Constitution should not be construed to be read as anything giving the right to an abortion in the state of Iowa. And so it's the first, I think it's the first amendment that would add a medical procedure to the Iowa Constitution. And it's the first time that, well, it's one of the very few amendments to the Iowa Constitution that takes away a right. And so it's incredibly damaging. It could put a lot of things at risk, including in vitro fertilization. It could put some forms of birth control at risk. So it needs to pass 2 general assemblies. And so it's passed 1 in the House. If it comes back to us and gets amended and we're able to come to an agreement, then it needs to be passed again in the 2023-24 legislative session. But so far that hasn't officially passed out of both chambers in the same version. So, but I am anticipating we'll see that sometime this week. The House doesn't like what the Senate did to it, but we'll just see what ends up. So I can go on and on. We've got lists and lists and lists. I know Zach and I both do, but I'll tell you that on the House side, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to recruit candidates wherever we can. We're working hard. You know, we got our clock cleaned in 2020. Everybody might remember that. But we learned a lot, and we've been doing a lot of research into why, and we're working as hard as we can to do exactly what Zach did a few moments ago, which is to remind people that if something good happened in your life, if you got a stimulus check, if you have extra unemployment benefits until Kim Reynolds stepped in, a lot of the good things that are happening, if you got a COVID vaccine, thank a Democrat. And so we're trying to nationalize the race in Iowa just as much as Republicans nationalized the race in 2020 and 2016, while also telling local Iowa stories. So it's not one or the other, but we're trying to leverage what we can from the great work from the Biden administration. And then, so that's going to be a big push. Obviously, we're going to have to hurry. It's going to be a sprint to the filing deadline in March of 2022 from when we get these maps. We'll just see what it looks like and go from there. We're recruiting at the precinct level so that, you know, we're getting some folks lined up so that then when maps are drawn, we can look quickly and see where they are in the new districts, and so that we're not putting anybody up against each other or anybody up against one of our incumbents. And then finally, you know, the question was, what can you do here in the last few days of session? Zach keeps saying week or 2. And I am unwilling to accept that framing. I am going to force them to be done this week because of my almighty power. No, but I am trying to. I am hoping that we can get done this week. We're hearing that they go below 26 Republicans in the Senate next week, and below 51 Republicans in the House next week. So we're hearing that they fall short again. But who knows? I mean, Senator Walz, your majority leader seems a little less in a hurry than ours about getting out of there. So we'll see how this goes. But the bottom line is continuing to push, continuing to let legislators know what needs to be done, understanding, and I think this is important, understanding that if there's good legislation out there, Democrats are going to do what we can to support it. We're not going to hurt Iowans just because we have a partisan agenda, right? We have an agenda that is to advance Iowa. That's why we have bipartisan votes as much as we do, because we understand that we need to make and affect change. But if there are bills that we think are damaging or that can really cause a problem, it's going to be really hard for us to support them, even if there are good components, because putting my name on something, I need to feel that this entire bill is going to be as strong as it can be. So this is when it gets hard, is here at the end, when there are some good things happening with compromise, but some other things that we think are really damaging to the state. So we're reading every bill as we can. I don't know about you, but I spent my weekend reading the tax bill. It was riveting and infuriating all at the same time. So I will stop there, and we can take questions or whatever we can do to help give you information.
Thank you very much, Senator Walz and Representative Confirst. My name is Janice Weiner. I'm also a member of the Potluck Insurgency Steering Committee, and I'm going to moderate the Q&A right now. So what I'd like to ask you to do, if you have a question, please either raise your digital hand, which you can find in the reaction section at the bottom of your screen, Or if not, you can always raise your actual hand, or you may also type a question in the chat. We will try and get through as many questions as we can. We're going to switch over to, we have until about 7:20. So we have a good 15 minutes plus for questions. So questions. And if not, I'll fill the space. So you better ask them.
We've got a question from Jackie Stellish in the chat. She asks, can you recap again where we are with the abortion amendment?
Yeah, so Jackie, the amendment was over in our chamber, so I'll just touch on it briefly. So we passed a version of the amendment. Essentially what happened, for decades, the Roe versus Wade decision has prevailed at the federal level, but at the state level, there had not actually been a legal determination of a right to an abortion beyond kind of just vague rulings here and there. In the last 10 years, the Iowa Supreme Court, like 40 years behind the US Supreme Court, did find, they've issued a ruling that basically found a right to an abortion within Iowa state constitution. That amendment that now Republicans are bringing forward would basically amend our state constitution to say clearly there is no right to an abortion in Iowa, and would of course pave the way for them to then pass all kinds of anti-choice laws here in our state. That amendment was introduced with very similar but different language in both the Senate and the House. The Senate passed our version, the House passed their version. The Senate then took up the House's version and then changed it to be their version and sent it back to the House, which is a great illustration of just like white Republican men fighting with each other about how they want to best regulate women's reproductive health. And they can't even agree with each other on it. But our expectation, unfortunately, is that they will figure out some resolution to that before we adjourn this year. And so each General Assembly lasts for 2 years, just like the United States House of Representatives has a 2-year Congress. And so in order for the amendment to go to the ballot, it has to pass both this General Assembly, which lasts 2021 and 2022, and then again in 2023 or 2024, and then it would go on the ballot in 2024 at the very soonest. So that's where we currently are. Keep your fingers crossed, and we can certainly hope that it doesn't actually wind up passing this year, and we might have a chance at blocking it next year. But we expect that they will have the votes to pass that before we gavel out this year.
Okay, we have a question from Tom and Cook. They're unmuted.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for taking the time to keep us up to speed on what's happening. My question is, what can we do to influence legislators who are not our representatives? I mean, we're kind of preaching to the choir here in terms of people that are interested, but if I write a letter or send a message to one of the Republican legislators from Western Iowa, are they likely to be influenced by what I have to say?
So unfortunately, no. To be honest with you, but one of the best ways that you can help when you're in a good district, a good area like this, is to help raise awareness among people in those districts. So that's where this interim session comes in. So if we can reach out to just voters in those districts when it's not election season and let them know your representative voted for A, B, C, and D, and if you don't think that's right, help us flip this seat in 2022. If you know people in those communities, the biggest thing that happens is we read, I'm sure Zach does too, we read their newsletters every week, and they just lie. We've read them, they are just lies. And so we have a year-round job of letting people in these red districts know what's really happening at the Capitol. And I'm not talking about like they just spin something. I mean, they just flat out lie and say all Democrats voted against something when that's just not true. And so it's really a matter of grassroots getting into those districts and, much like a sister district or a flip it kind of thing, helping people in this district year round know what their legislator is doing and how it's going to impact them. So it's not a great answer, but it's something tangible you can do.
One other thing I would add briefly is that if you have like friends or family who live in those areas, make sure you're talking with them. And especially if they're not politically engaged, it's probably harder to convince someone if they're like a right wing, Fox News, Newsmax type, right? But if they're just like a normal person and they're not necessarily as politically engaged, and you can have a conversation with them about politics and some of these issues that matter, that definitely helps in a big way.
Thank you. Next question is from Leslie Carpenter.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking the time to come here. And Jennifer, I heard your message loud and clear. I'm curious, though, whether or not you have seen any of the House debate, what bills are coming up for debate this week.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like anything new has been published on the website.
We're waiting to hear. And Leslie, that message wasn't just to you. I've got an email I'm writing back to you too. But I think you make some really good points about that tax bill. And I do understand the backfill and the mental health issues. And I don't want you to think I'm blowing it off. And that wasn't just targeted at you. It was really just what I'm feeling as I go into this week, where it's the decisions are tough. Right now we understand that in the House tomorrow, we're going to debate HHS budget, justice systems, and the judicial branch budget. Again, these are budgets that have not been agreed to by the Senate. So it's really just what I call performative legislation or legislating. We're just going in there to vote for something that's not agreed to, really not a great use of all of our time. But as you know, appropriations will consider the tax bill tomorrow in subcommittee and then in full committee.
Yeah, our understanding is that they've agreed to like an overall budget top line number, but the specifics, like Representative Confers just mentioned, are still being ironed out. So time will tell how long it takes them to get to a final answer.
We don't want to push them, Zach. I mean, what's the hurry?
Well, as someone who works for a city, and I know that the cities and counties would really appreciate at least knowing where they stand on the backfill, whichever way it goes, so that there's some certainty. So the next question is in the chat. It's from Liz O'Hara. Since polls show that most Iowans support current sensible restrictions on firearm purchase and use, what are your thoughts about how we can defeat the gun rights constitutional amendment?
Well, I was just going to say, it's going to take an all-out effort to inform the public about what this amendment really does, because it's going to be pitched as we're just adding the Second Amendment to the Iowa Constitution, and that's just simply not what it is. And there aren't a ton of states that have done this, and so we don't necessarily even have horror stories yet from states that have done this, but we do have some early indications about the impact. So we're going to just need to be educating the public nonstop about the true risk that this bill places things in. They will tell you over and over again, it doesn't end background checks. Well, no, technically it doesn't, but it will as soon as you challenge them, right? And so it's a matter of letting people know what's at stake, what's at risk, versus what's going to change the second the amendment gets added, if that makes sense.
Did you want to add anything to that, Zach?
The one thing that I'll add, so the language is very confusing. It's very easy to hear strict scrutiny guns and I think, oh, it's great, strict scrutiny of guns, like that's what we want, when in fact it does literally the exact opposite. It holds laws that govern gun safety to the highest, strictest legal standard. And so I think the good news is, Liz, that the polling is really clear. A vast majority of Iowans support the legislation, or they support Iowa's current background check process, or what we had before. Moms Demand volunteers are great. I know that Johnson County has an awesome Moms Demand chapter, and I'm looking forward to visiting with you all after the session ends to brainstorm on this. But what I would say is that even though every Democrat, I think in my chamber, I think maybe all but one over in the House voted against it. I do think that when the chips are down and we're duking this out in the court of public opinion in 2022, I do think that we will see a majority of Iowans reject this amendment on the ballot box. And I think maybe that rejection will actually send a very positive message about where the state is on gun safety reform.
I hope you're right. Representative Bohannon writes in the chat that in general, 70% of laws subjected to strict scrutiny are struck down.
Yeah.
So the next question, which has sort of been answered in the chat, but it's useful for everyone to hear it anyway, is from Mickey Carlson, who wants to know, is there a cheat sheet that shows how each legislator voted on each bill?
Yeah, not really, unfortunately. However, the legislative website is actually quite good. I mentioned that in the chat. If you go to legis.iowa.gov, Jennifer, I don't know about you, I use the legislative website probably 10 times a day, like as a legislator, just learning. Yep, okay, awesome. It's been pulled up here. Just like, to learn about what bills histories are, which lobbyist groups are supporting them, either for or against. The only thing that you have to know is what the name or the title of the bill is. So for example, House File 802, which we were just on. And then you have to know which General Assembly was introduced. So the current General Assembly that we're in, Assembly 89, so 2001, 2021, 2022, sorry. And then it'll tell you all kinds of great information here. Who's managing the bill on the floor, if there have been changes to the bill, or if it's evolved as it's gone through the committee process, the bill history that Sarah's currently on. And then, Sarah, if you click show all, you can show people like the complete history of this bill, which is like very, very lengthy, but you can see it's ordered sequentially. So it's like, okay, it came over from the Senate, there's a point of order, the House concurred, it passed, there's, all that stuff. It does take a little bit of the hang of it to get to navigate it, but it is actually a really, really excellent website.
I will
Thank
say,
you.
that votesmart.org does also log all the votes of legislators, but I think it's a lagging thing. So I think they do that after the session. They go in and upload all that data.
So I actually wanted to find out where the so-called Back the Blue bill stands at this point. There was a big, huge bill came out of the House, and I don't know where it stands now, or what part of it you believe is likely to pass.
Well, I can just start since it started in the House. We passed a bill that is called the Back the Blue bill. And it includes a couple provisions that some of our members decided that they've supported. I mean, if I can just say, it's sort of a trap so that they can say we voted against police. That's why the bill exists. It's a political bill. And then it really does a lot of things that are bad for free speech, demonstrations, things like that. It's a terrible bill. And then we sent it to the Senate. The Senate took out the provisions that made some of our members comfortable voting for it. Including sick leave and workers' comp, I believe, elements. And then we haven't gotten it back yet. So the Senate voted it out. It's coming back to us, but we haven't seen it yet. Again, I imagine we'll see something like that this week. They're not going to let this one die on the branch.
Yeah, so we're at this very strange point where, Republicans have brought forward a series of ideas that only a handful of them are actually supported by law enforcement groups, and like even fewer of them are actually being actively supported and lobbied for by law enforcement groups. There were a series of changes that law enforcement groups kind of brought together kind of unofficially. They weren't like in a bill, but they were just kind of being discussed with various senators and representatives as like a good bipartisan, reforms that would actually help law enforcement do their jobs. Those ideas were never brought forward for a vote because Republicans are way more interested in scoring political points than in actually supporting law enforcement and giving them the tools they need to enforce the law. Needless to say, just zooming out, we're all, terribly disappointed. I don't know if you can actually see it, but on my wall behind my desk is a photo of the Des Moines Register from when the governor signed into bill the law last summer that was taking the first step on kind of reforming law enforcement in the state of Iowa. Republicans promised then to take another step and another step. This is just the beginning. And unfortunately, they're actually moving in the wrong direction. It's like Tom Harkin used to always say, Republicans put it in R and they go backwards. So that's kind of where we are right now. That's why we need to elect a Democratic trifecta to put it into D and go forward.
I think that's a very good way to end the Q&A session. Let's get this all in D moving forward, as opposed to the current R, which seems to move everything backward. Thank you so much to both Zach Walls and Jennifer Confirst for being here and explaining this all in actually very brief, in a very brief time. Incredibly enlightening, if depressing. But we know that we have our work cut out for us, and to explain exactly what we ought to do in order to move forward and get at least take a portion of our state back, I'm going to turn it over to Roseanne Cook. You're muted, Roseanne.
There we go. Thanks, Janice. Roseanne Cook. I'm going to do this last 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to call it a call to action part of the program tonight, because I know that all of you are here tonight because you have many concerns about what has been happening in Iowa recently and what we might unfortunately be looking forward to in the next couple of years. So I wanted to give you some ideas, and I have a couple of people lined up to talk here tonight about some things that I think you can all do. So I hope that you will listen to this next session and think about, grab onto at least one thing here that you will make a commitment to do in the next few weeks when you possibly can. And I know it's a weird time to say, oh, you should get politically active if you haven't been already, because here it's almost summer, the legislative session is almost over, everybody wants to take a deep breath and go on vacation. But truly, we can't do that. I mean, we can do some vacation, but we need to do some other things as well. One of the things I would really like to have all of you do, if you have not done so already, is to read the report and recommendations that some of us on the Potluck Steering Committee did last winter. Janice, who was just on, Sarah Prinius, Emily Silliman, and I spent most Monday and Wednesday nights for 2.5 months talking to people about the outcome of the 2020 election. And we were trying to figure out what happened beyond the obvious of having Trump on the ticket and not being able to knock doors. So we talked to candidates, we talked to representatives of grassroots groups, we talked to former chairs of the IDP, we talked to members of county parties and so on. And I would really, really like to have you read that report. A number, and Sarah put the link in chat for you. A number of the recommendations in there, it's true, are for the IDP, the Truman Fund, and the Senate Majority Fund. But I would like to have you pay attention to those so that you can reach out to those groups to push them in a direction that's not the same old, same old. For example, we need to do year-round organizing. We need to honor all candidates and support all candidates as ambassadors of our party, even in districts that are not flippable. We need to ditch the coordinated campaign. It's clearly not doing enough for down ballot candidates in Iowa. We have got to do a better job to help our down ballot candidates. So there's a number of things in there that I think you can help, apply some pressure to the leadership of the Democratic infrastructure here in Iowa. So I would strongly urge you to take a look at that report. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to talk about specifically in that report that I think apply to us, then that's with regard to year-round organizing and reframing our messaging. Year-round organizing on all levels is absolutely critical. We cannot wait until it's the, summer all 2022. We have got to get to work now if we're going to change things in Iowa, have any chance of doing that, even beginning in 2022. And we also need to work on our messaging. One of the things that we heard a lot about in our interviews was the problem with messaging in Iowa. And I'm just going to read you a very brief section of our recommendations where we say, we must reframe our messaging so we're not stuck responding to Republican taunts and lies, but we're pushing our own clear, concise, consistent messaging. Part of that is getting out ahead on issues and framing them as we see fit. Part is reclaiming language that Republicans have appropriated, like freedom, liberty, patriotism. Part of it is having clear responses ready to deploy to combat some of the most virulent Republican taunts against us, that we're socialists, and you hear that all the time, we're baby killers, we're gun snatchers, etc., and even worse. I think that there are a number of things that we can do, that all of us can do, with regard to year-round messaging or year-round organizing and messaging. And so that's why I've invited a few people here tonight to talk about what those things might be. Jane Cranston is going to head up an effort to write letters to the editor to small town newspapers across the street and across the state, and not just small town newspapers, but newspapers in areas that perhaps were once blue and have gone red, like Burlington, for example. If you read the New York Times article recently, there was a lot about Burlington, Iowa, and they're as emblematic of what's been happening in Iowa. So Jane is going to come back on here for just a moment to talk about that project. I would urge you to listen to what she has to say and follow up on that opportunity. So can we get Jane back for just a moment?
Sure, I'm right here.
Okay.
Well, let me begin by saying that the most read part of the newspaper, they tell us, is the letters to the editor. I had no idea. This is true across the state. And this is one place where Republicans generally do a much better job of using that communication tool. I would encourage everybody to write a letter. Now, there's all different kinds of letters. You can write a letter just expressing your opinions and your values and that sort of thing, a more general letter. That's fine. You can also write about a specific bill if you know about the bill and you know the timely way to do that. We have a group that we are starting in there. It turns out, as we've gotten into this, we found out there are other groups, and it's a fascinating kind of a thing, how they all have different takes on it. But we are working with Amy Adams, who works for Progress Iowa, and she will help anybody who would like to write a letter. So she'll be happy to edit it with you or work on how to draft it. We're going to have her as a speaker, and she has a presentation about writing letters. I don't know, this is such a savvy group. I think everybody would be able to write a very cogent letter on a variety of topics. And it's the problem is you can only be in once every 30 days. So that makes it so that you want to have as many people as possible writing letters. You can also do a guest opinion, which of course is a little bit more space, but it's harder to get in. So if you'd like to do that, please put your email address in the chat or get in touch with Ed or I. We'd be delighted to have you. I'll be getting back to everybody this week, and we'll be setting up kind of a training time. And if you don't want to be part of our group, but you would just be interested in writing a letter, I haven't had any that were refused so far. I think they know this is something that people like to read. So I would really encourage you to take advantage of that. And that's the way we can reframe our message for free during the downtime before the election. So I hope you can take advantage of that.
Thank you, Jane. And Jane's group will provide some guidance on what newspapers we might want to send letters to.
Sure, we have all that contact information.
Yeah, that'll be very helpful. And we can write about the loony things that the legislature has done. And why we feel they're loony. I mean, you might not call it loony in your letter, but you get the idea. I'm also going to ask, I don't know if it's John Green or Tom who's going to talk tonight, but we have a Board of Supervisors election coming up in Johnson County. And one of the reasons I was interested in having someone come for a couple of minutes to talk about that race tonight is that, believe it or not, we have some parts of Johnson County that are trending red. The ones I know about in particular are Solon and Big Grove. And I'm sure there are others. So if we have an opportunity on behalf of John Green, who's our candidate for Board of Supervisors, to get out and knock some doors or text people or make phone calls to talk about our values, what Democrats believe in and what we want to accomplish for people, I think this is a great opportunity to do it. So I'm going to ask, I'm not sure if it's Tom or John who's going to jump in here. Why don't you come and join us for a moment?
Thank you, Roseanne. I appreciate the opportunity. Tom's going to be helping me out. He'll put a couple links in the chat as we get to this stuff. But first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm John Green, the former mayor down here in Lone Tree, former press secretary for Dave Friedenthal, the previous Democratic governor of the state of Wyoming. So clearly, both by dint of where I am and where I've been, I have experience working for Democrats, working with Democrats in rural and red areas. And Roseanne, I want to underline something that you mentioned a couple moments ago, that we can't be afraid, that we have to own our values, that we have to reclaim messaging, and we have to get out there and we have to be proud of what it is that we stand for, what we're arguing about, what we're fighting for. I'd also like to take a moment to thank everyone who supported me Tuesday and also acknowledge that it was a very close contest. I look forward to working with everyone in the Johnson County Democratic Party. I'm not trying to shoo in and take the place over, but I did think that due to where my feet are down here in Lone Tree, that I do have an opportunity and an ability to speak to folks, to meet folks, to be with folks where they're at, that we need to work on. And so it's important that we get out there, and even when we might not necessarily win a precinct, we contest that precinct, every precinct, if for no other reason than to mitigate the blowout margins that we see in rural areas. When I ran for mayor down here, Lone Tree is about 60% Republican. And of course, it's a nonpartisan office here in the small towns, but I have never made a secret of what my progressive policies are and, what my principles are, what's important to me. And people, even when they don't agree with me, they respect that. They understood that instead of wanting to be, a caretaker, someone who's just letting inertia carry us through, that even if they didn't necessarily agree with everything that I was going to be doing or trying to do, that they wanted somebody who gave a damn. That's the long and the short of it. I spent a lot of time as mayor trying to raise the profile of Lone Tree, to really be an advocate for us. And people get that, even when they don't necessarily agree with the particulars. And I do think that I have an ability to get out there and talk to folks where they're at. That being said, where am I at? What do I want to do? It's fundamentally imperative that we take the $29 million in American Rescue Plan money that Johnson County is set to receive, and we have to do more than invite folks to come ask for assistance. There's two reasons for that. First of all, if you've ever had to apply for government assistance, you understand that it's punitive, it's difficult. People want to shame you for it. I've been on unemployment before. I didn't qualify because Republicans were in charge in Wyoming at the time, but I've applied for food stamps. And the whole process, beginning to end, is configured in a way that it's supposed to make you feel bad, like you're a failure. That's not the case. COVID has made that extremely clear. We are all in fragile circumstances. I'm doing pretty well right now because of good luck. It isn't because I'm smarter than anyone else. It's not because I deserve it. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You want to talk about deserve? Look at the folks that we call essential workers that we've treated as expendable. It's disgusting So with these COVID relief dollars, we need to actively go out and find people who need help, and we need to give them assistance so that they can apply for it. That might mean that they don't have a computer and they need some help filling out paperwork. It might be that they don't understand what paperwork or what records they need. We need to go out and help those folks. So the folks that really need help get it. So
John,
now, yes.
John, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're already kind of running past our usual time. So I'm going to ask if you could jump over to what we could do for you. Tom
Yes.
mentioned that there was a weekend of action coming up next weekend. What can we get out there and do for you next weekend?
Thank you, Roseanne. And I do want to respect your time. So Tom, right now, hopefully we'll put a link in to the chat. Here's where you can sign up to volunteer if you have the time and the ability to. There's all kinds of volunteer stuff that we need. So please just check it out and see what you feel comfortable, what you think you have the time to do. And then also, of course, if you cannot volunteer, every campaign costs money. And so Tom now will hopefully be putting in a link to our Act Blue, where any contribution helps. And thank you. Tom, if you could also put my phone number in and my email address, I'd invite any of you. I know that I've been more active down here in the southeastern portion of the county, but if you have any questions, any concerns, please feel free to reach out. And one last thing. This isn't a huge volunteer thing, but it's just something to keep front of mind all the time from now through June 8th. Whenever you're having a casual conversation with another Democrat, please mention the special election. Our canvassers are saying about 95% of doors they've knocked this weekend. Folks don't even know that the special election is scheduled for June 8th. Roseanne, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to working for you. Let's deny Phil one more time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I will mention that, yes, we do need to get the vote out. I remember a very snowy January day when we had a special election several years ago. I guess I don't know exactly what the year was, but that was the day the Republican got elected to the Board of Supervisors. And that did not go well. So we do need to get out and work on behalf of John. So thank you for being with us tonight, John. And Tom, thank you for posting the information about what we can do to help. I also asked Mickey Carlson to come here tonight to talk for a moment about the new Iowa project and the outreach committee. Mickey, can we get you on for just a couple of just a moment here? We have a meeting coming up Tuesday night. Let's tell people about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Roseanne. I will be quick. I realize you're over schedule already. The new Iowa project is an effort to turn Iowa blue. We know this is a huge undertaking. We figure it'll take about 10 years. We're taking the playbook from Stacey Abrams, and we're trying to, among other things, connect groups like this across the state. I am so impressed with the work that the Potluck Insurgency has done. I can't begin to tell you. You're just right on point with so much of the analysis you've done and so many of the activities you're doing. The new Iowa project, again, I'll try to be brief, has 5 committees. We have one focused on inactive and independent voters. We have one focused on communications, our message. We have one focused on data and benchmarking. We have one focused on voter registration, turnout, and of course that starts with voter education. The committee that I'm one of 3 chairs for is community outreach. And we have started with listening posts, deep conversations with people in labor, in rural, Latino communities, senior communities, persons with disabilities, urban, LGBTQ. We're really focused on communities of color, especially African-American communities that have undervoted in past elections. And they are represented in each of the groups that I just mentioned. People forget that. So one of the things that they say is that they would really like to be involved from the beginning, like most of us. They don't want people coming to them a week before the election and asking for them to make phone calls or volunteer. So one of the things that I think happens is we tend to ask the people that we know. And so we have to go outside our comfort zone a little bit and find people that maybe we don't know as well and get them involved. So that's my challenge for all of you, which you might think is a little cheeky to start right off with a challenge. But if you look at this screen, you see the same thing I see. We're all pretty much the same color. We have to change that. Iowa is changing and we can change that. But we have to reach out to people that maybe we don't know as well and invite them to this group, invite them to be part of this work that you're doing, to get out the vote, to support John and other candidates in your area. The other thing that people want is to have access to their candidates before the election and to have access to elected officials after the election. So our group will really focus on things like candidate forums and town hall meetings, listening posts. Perhaps we ought to do one in Solon or Big Grove, Roseanne, we can talk about that. The next planning meeting is Tuesday, May 18th, 6 o'clock via Zoom. And I will put that in your chat right now. And then I'll be quiet. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mickey. See you Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Bear with us. I know we're running a little long tonight. An extra 5 or 10 minutes won't kill you. Jean Bancroft had her hand up. Let's go to Jean, and then I've got 2 more people lined up to talk to us briefly. Jean, what did you have for us?
Sure, many may have seen in the chat already, but as John mentioned, very few people are aware of the upcoming election, special election. And the League of Women Voters is sponsoring a candidate forum this Wednesday evening. And I did put that Zoom registration in there. It's in the chat. I realize everybody here is aware of it, but if you could send that out to other people in your network, so just so that they're aware of it and can maybe opt in to hear John and Phil. I don't know if there's going to be an independent candidate or not, but anyway, at least John and Phil respond to questions. I'll let that go. I just wanted to be sure everybody was aware.
Okay, thank you, Jean. John McAtee is here and wants to talk a moment about the urgency of reaching out on climate action before we, in case we lose the majority in the House in 2022. John, have we got you here somewhere? John? Where's John McAtee? Huh, all right, I don't see him.
He was on earlier.
Yeah, he was, yeah. All right, well, let's go to Sarah. Sarah's going to tell us about why we should all learn relational organizing.
Well, partly because relational organizing has already come up twice. Mickey mentioned reaching out to people that you know, trying to get them involved. And John Green said, every time you run into another Democrat, you should be talking to them about the upcoming special election. And that's relational organizing. It's talking to the people you know. And the good thing about relational organizing is that it's like a more authentic way of engaging people in the political process. And one way that it's different too is I feel like it's not so much convincing people that you're right and that they should agree with you, but it's convincing people to get involved and to start engaging and being part of this and not just letting stuff happen to them. So we are going to be running a relational organizing training session. I've been planning it for after the legislative session, which it just keeps not ending. So I haven't been able to actually get it on the calendar yet. But if it ends next week, we'll be looking to the next week after that. We will put out a call to everybody in Potluck to participate in the relational organizing training. And this is going to be really a great way to start doing that year-round organizing and start getting moving on that. So thanks, Roseanne.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. All right, I hope we didn't overwhelm you, but just grab on to one of those things. If you do just one of those things, you'll be doing something wonderful. And it's much better than sitting on the couch watching MSNBC, right? You know, the only way I got through the 4 Trump years was trying to stay as active as I could politically and doing, you know, what I could to help bring about better times. And I would tell you that's worth a lot. It helped me get through Trump. It also helped me get through COVID. So I strongly recommend it to you as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily to say our goodbyes, and she's going to tell you about our next event. Emily Silliman.
Emily Silliman. Before adjourning this for the evening, I'd like to thank our speakers again, Zach Walls and Jennifer Confrist, for taking the time to speak with us. Potluck Insurgency has one upcoming event, an actual in-person potluck, first time in over a year, to be held outdoors on Sunday, June 27th at 5:30 p.m. Look for an email with details, and if you'd like to be on our email list, go to our website or contact us at potluckinsurgency@gmail.com. I'll stick that in the notes. I want to thank everyone who came. I want to thank everyone who came and participated in this important discussion, and have a great rest of your evening.